I hope we don't lose sight of the importance of that native feel. Native is no longer meaning mobile. It means native to a platform, whether that is Mac OS, a watch, a TV, Android. It means so much.
Hello, welcome to the DevTools-fm podcast. This is a podcast about developer tools and the people who make them. I'm Andrew, and this is my co-host, Justin.
Hey, everyone. We're really excited to have Dan Stepanov with us today. So, Dan, you've done some really interesting work on NativeWind, which we're really excited to talk about. But it sounds like you've had a pretty expensive career, worked on a lot of really cool things, been building apps for a long time. So we're really excited to talk to you. Before we dive in and start talking about NativeWind and some of the other stuff you worked on, would you like to tell our audience a little bit more about yourself?
Yeah, sure. So first of all, thank you for having me. I'm Dan, otherwise known as Only Dan's. I am, I guess I would call a career software developer. Academically chemical engineering, but decided like midway through, like coding. I discovered this via hackathons. There's like coding is for me. So for about 10 years, I have been primarily focused on mobile apps, and I was sort of shoehorned into working on React Native back in 2015 and have kind of been here ever since through many iterations, but where, the first 8 years, we'll call it, was spent largely focused on, applications and stuff. The last two, maybe a little more, have been focused primarily on building developer tooling.
Cool. So how did you get to NativeWind? And could you describe what NativeWind is for a person who has no clue what it is?
Yeah. NativeWind is Tailwind for React Native. It is a glorified wrapper around the Tailwind CLI. And Tailwind, in case anyone is unclear, is not unlike Bootstrap from back in the day in the sense of these sort of shortened descriptors, right, for CSS. And you can use them to vastly simplify styling in React. And so we saw that, or I guess Mark really saw that simplicity and wanted to bring it to React Native. And there's a lot of nuance, so you have to make something that, especially with React Native going more web now as well, you have to make it work for just base web, and then also for native styling, which does not work like the web. So that's what NativeWind is. The way that I got involved with NativeWind is I was spending some time working on Tamagui last year. I've lost all track of time at this point, by the way. I have no idea what's going on or when I worked somewhere else. But I spent a little bit of time working on Tamagui. And while that didn't work out, I soon after ended up at App.js in May of this year. And I was excited because I had been talking to Mark Lawler over voice chat and Discord a lot. And I got to meet him in person for the first time. And so here we are there's this like mezzanine, right, to set the scene, and it's sort of overlooking the stage. And I see him sitting there, and he is a giant person, by the way. He is a mountain of a human being. And I see him sitting in one of these lounge chairs that they have set up, and I'm like, this is it. Go talk to him. Like, go say hi. And NativeWind, just to set the scene here, is the last major update was 2 years ago with version 2.0. Version 4 had been announced in January of this year, I think, but had really seen no development until then. So there's this giant question mark around what's going on with it. And Mark had recently joined Expo, and no one knew, like, does that mean NativeWind's going to go to Expo or what's going on? So I go and sit down next to him. I have a photo from this, actually. But I look at him and I'm like, hey, Mark, so do you need any help with NativeWind? Because I'd be happy to help out, getting it across the finish line. Fully expecting him to be like, no, I'm good. Like I'll get it out. It'll be ready when it's ready. But he actually responded. He was like, no, I reckon I might, And that was the beginning of this sort of this journey. I think I formally stepped in like August. And then it took up until October when it actually launched, version 4, that is. Overwhelmingly, that work is Mark. I might only take credit for just kind of like being a forcing function kind of thing. Yeah. But even after launch, it has still like that feeling doesn't go away of that urgency, that like gap that you feel leading up to the launch. Post launch, it doesn't go away. It's still there, and I still kind of feel it. Yeah. So that was NativeWind version 4.
That's awesome. And kudos for like getting involved and helping push that along. I know there's a lot of times when you hear somebody like with a bunch of enthusiasm come up to a maintainer, like, oh, let me help you. And you're like, yes, please. And then they like disappear. You're like, what happened? So kudos for pushing that over the line. This is while you're talking, I was thinking, back in the day, I had gotten involved in like PhoneGap and Cordova, way, way back in the day, of like building native apps with web, not native at all. I remember there was some attempts to make CSS libraries that like felt native. Because the big thing at the time then, which I remember hearing a lot, is like people are not going to trust an app that doesn't look like a native app. Is like, I remember hearing that in those times. It's like, no, it has to look like the native interfaces or whatever. And I was briefly looking, I couldn't find any of the old like style libraries or whatever that I was seeing at the time. But it's interesting that it seems like as an industry, I'm sure that is still around, that feeling of like, oh, this needs to feel native, even in React Native. But like by and large, like a lot of companies sort of moved away from that, like, oh, we're not trying to use like Apple's like human design, it's like, let's like lean into it a little bit, but like do our custom branding or whatever. Do you feel like that's changing, or are you trying to change it? Like, what's the story there?
I think I struggle with this a lot, actually. So I like to think of it as there's two cohorts of people, and I'll actually run polls for this. And the results always surprise me, but there's two cohorts of people. There's the people who want to build what I call cross-platform applications. And then there's the people who want to build multi-platform applications. And the difference there for me is that cross-platform is let's make it run everywhere, and multi-platform is let's make it feel native everywhere. And I think that a lot of the early hype about React Native was the former, and we're only now coming around to the latter, for a multitude of different reasons. But what I find when I poll folks in our community is that it's actually evenly split down the middle, and that's jarring. And so I think it's really important to provide the options for people to do what they feel is the priority. For me, that native feel that you're referring to is super important because design, that visual aesthetic, is the way that you establish trust with strangers on the internet, right? You're not meeting people, you're not doing sales in person anymore. You have basically one opportunity when you show them something to establish that trust, and it'll go a pretty long way. The next chance you get is every time they use your product. And you want to try to make sure that also is as pleasant. But for a lot of people, your banks, your healthcare apps, it doesn't matter really. And it's important that they have the tooling to make things cross-platform or whatever. And this is why I don't see things as like one tool versus another. I think we all have a role to play in that process. Yeah. And then you can just focus on your zone, right? Your fraction of the pie is like, we serve these people, and by not trying to do more than that, we're going to be the best within this sub.
So would you say NativeWind
I
is in that second category where you like lean more into like the native feel, or is it the opposite where you lean more into the universal feel?
Well, NativeWind started before my time. NativeWind started as an attempt to be a unified styling system. So quite a bit more than it is now. And part of the version 4 idea was to move away from that and just be sort of this unopinionated, so to speak, styling option, right? And so I think that NativeWind, as best it can, is going to try to be not opinionated about whether you want to do cross-platform or multi-platform. And so you end up seeing component libraries then spawn out like React Native reusables, GlueStack, right? Ones that favor more of that generic look, that shadcn look or whatever, right? That base configuration, while simultaneously allowing for something like NativeWind UI or any other library that focuses on a native look and feel, right? It's more, you think more of it as a foundation on the basis, like your core, your only assumption for people who are going to use NativeWind is these people like the interface of Tailwind. They don't want to entertain something different. Ideally, they're even coming from web into native, and we're just giving that to them. If you don't like that, that's fine. You should try something else. You know, Tamagui is another great option for that. So I don't think it has an opinion, NativeWind, on cross-platform.
We'd like to stop and thank our sponsor for the week, Mux. If you haven't heard of Mux, Mux is an amazing platform that makes adding video to your product as easy as adding a few libraries to your code. If you've ever had to add video to a product, you know there's so many different pits of failure that you can fall into along the way. When it comes to video, you have to worry about every end of the experience. There's so many things to learn about and so many things to optimize and so many things that are going to stop you from shipping faster. So that's where Mux comes in. They have an awesome set of APIs and components that you can sprinkle throughout your code to add a seamless video playback experience. They're a team of experts in the video field that know everything there is to know about playing video on the web, and they'll have you shipping in no time. The thing I'd like to highlight this week is how many options they give you when it comes to streaming. They have 3 different levels: Basic, Plus, and Premium. And with the new Premium one, you can serve the highest quality video to your customers for a multitude of new use cases. You can stream things like high-end sports events and anything that needs that extra bit of quality, but they still have the rest of the range if you don't want to pay as much all the time. So if you want to learn more about Mux and add video to your product faster than you ever thought before, head over to mux.com. And with that, let's get back to the episode.
Let's talk a little bit about the sort of difference between NativeWind and Tailwind. I mean, I think a lot of our listeners will know what Tailwind is and be familiar with it, but what are the changes that you had to make, or why was this necessary to build when Tailwind exists in the React Native world?
Yeah, so NativeWind can be thought of largely as a giant mapping function, right? You have the way styles are handled on mobile in general, which differs from web. Then you also have the fact that React Native just sort of does things differently than, say, React. And so you have to account for those differences. So you have this giant mapping function that's going to try to translate the web descriptors that are coming to us from Tailwind world, right? And you're trying to properly map those to their equivalents on the native level. Then the other side of that is addressing the edge cases. And an example of one of those edge cases is, REM font sizing and stuff like that. Is like a very nuanced difference, but it'll throw you off because you'll go into web and the same code you've written in, that's rendering on web is going to be different than on mobile. And that'll initially be like, well, something's broken here. And in fact, that's just something upstream in React Native itself. So you're always trying to find what subset of functionality, CSS wise, you want to include in the styling library without hindering performance too much, while simultaneously addressing these edge cases, right? Whereas if you're simply rendering on web, it's just going to serve as a one-to-one mapping, and there's no difference there. So working on it then for Mark and myself and any of the other contributors really just comes down to, on an abstract level, this balancing act, right? Because you can't include everything. And if you can't do that, then what do you include? And to what extent? And what does that look like?
So the things you were talking about adding there were like CSS features, right? Because when you're using Tailwind, you have like hovers and all of these other things So you're talking about like what things you actually choose to implement because those don't exist in React Native, right?
Exactly. And there's a lot of assumption on like, what does that mean? What does hover mean on native, right? Further, we just included animations and like transitions with version 4. What does that look like? Like, how do people interact with animations and what are their expectations? What does it look like when they chain animations together and what are their expectations there? Are they passing by value or are they passing by percentage? You know, all of these different kinds of it's a perpetual iterative process to try to understand more the behavioral aspect, like what is the experience people are looking for, and then we double back and we make it performant, right? We make it like something you really want to use and ideally really can't operate without. Then we make it performant. That's kind of our approach.
What are the biggest performance issues here? So you've, hinted to just like rendering performance, trying to replicate CSS-like behaviors in a native context, which may require extra steps. But like, what are the other things that, or like, what was the biggest bottlenecks? What was the biggest challenges that you had to face?
So I think the biggest challenge, so again, like from contrasting with like working on Tamagui stuff, right? And again, very, very loose, like I did very little there, but just on a surface level, there isn't really an optimized compiler with NativeWind yet, at least, right? And so NativeWind's gonna do really poorly or perform very poorly on these sort of benchmark tests where you're testing like 1,000 list items or something with a GIF in them, right? And you can even argue the, what do you call it, the efficacy or something, or the effectiveness of testing in that way. But we're very much focused, like I said, on creating the proper experience and then doubling back to the performance. And a lot of that performance suffers simply because you're including stuff that just doesn't need to be there, that isn't being utilized. So, or perhaps even the output file that you're generating has more text in it in some key value object than it needs to have. A lot of the performance improvements included in version 4 stemmed from simply like changing, a word starting with D to just the letter D, but there was just many instances of that, So there's minor things like that. There's larger changes to be had. We're currently working on a more like pure NativeWind variant that we see as like the first step in a much more performant library. We have a lot of plans in the coming months that now that we have version 4 out, we can take those risks, right? We have something that we can give people that's more stable, that they can use, so that we can really get more experimental with that performance aspect.
What is this pure version that you're talking about? How does that change things?
So, to be honest, I haven't quite fully read through it. Mark sort of just shared it with me, and he was like, here's this thing. And it includes some of the stuff, right? It includes some of what NativeWind covers, and it doesn't include other things. He shared it with me as a sort of precursor to something that could be utilized for folks maintaining component libraries, right? So like GlueStack, if you wanted to use NativeWind as your underlying engine, so to speak, then you don't have to adopt the bloat that would come with it that you're not going to utilize anyways. And so it's almost like this minified version of the project. I'm pretty sure it might even be public. So if anyone wanted to look through it, I think it's published under like NativeWind /NativeWind-pure. But the goal is to kind of like dial back, and where version 4 was sort of, let's throw a bunch of stuff in here. And then as we add more things, try to make everything work together. The pure version is like, let's introduce a minified version of it so that we can intentionally then layer in the other stuff as necessary. And that way we can control better for any performance hits that you might incur while using it for your project. Performance in React Native inherently is a pretty weird thing because React Native by nature is already including a lot of stuff that you just don't need. Yeah, my journey in NativeWind has predominantly been one of learning more about bundlers. I think any person who jumps into dev tooling is eventually just going to get to that layer, and you have a decision to make of, are you wanting, do you want to go deeper into the world of ASTs? I don't know. I don't know what the answer is for that, for me yet, but it's increasingly becoming like the thing.
Have you guys had to like grapple with a bunch of different bundlers? Does NativeWind only like support Metro out of the box or something?
Yeah. So I get this question a lot, right? Like you have right, because right now everyone's like, there's all these different bundlers and stuff, and you got Vite and Repack and Metro and stuff. And Metro is its own whole thing that has sort of both a human level, challenge, and then there's like technical challenges. And the reason it was even introduced in the first place is very different than like why the React Native community is using it, kind of thing. And so NativeWind supports Metro out of the box. That is our intention. We're going to continue to do that. It's not to say that NativeWind can't work with Vite or other bundlers for that fact, but we aren't going to offer support for it. And something that I think about pretty frequently as a maintainer is, how do you not just turn people away from that? Because I get that a lot of people who are going to want to use, say, Vite are not going to actually be willing to put forth the work themselves in order to make that happen. But there's going to be people out there who are willing. And I don't want to turn them away. Like, I'd rather this kind of tool set work for as many people as possible. So what does it look like? What does it look like to empower those people, but simultaneously tell them, like, look, we got a lot on our plate. We can't do all of this. And Metro, by the way, is not great to support. Its flexibility comes at a tremendous cost. And a lot of that cost is sweat, talent, and blood, which is why I respect folks like Evan Bacon as much as I do. I mean, you look at the Expo team, the software engineers over there, which I very fortunately had some, I had the opportunity to spend some time there. All of us have in our work moments where we don't know what's like a task is put in front of us. We have no idea how this is going to work. But a lot of the time we do, and we're just executing on work. At Expo, every single thing you do is one of those, like, you have no idea, like, just go figure it out. And it was a weird kind of dynamic to jump into, you know what I mean? Where it's just like, kind of just try it, figure it out, and that's why you're here.
Yeah, it seems like native is a hard platform to develop for. Like, I myself am a web developer, but anytime I've tried to dip my toe in some iOS development, like the docs are just like inscrutable, like they're everywhere. It seems like there's not enough. People tell me to go like watch videos from like keynotes, and it's just like the OS is a black box and it shouldn't be, and it kind of baffles me.
I struggle with this so much because people will ask me, especially because I've had experience, my initial experience with mobile development is native iOS, like Objective-C and Swift. People ask me like, oh, what is the best way to build apps? And what do you think of React Native? And I'm like, it's shit. It sucks. It's not great. Like, I think it's going to be really good in a year or two. And I think that Expo fills in a lot of the gaps, right? But I feel like I've been saying that for quite some time. And I'm always reminded of this guy, David. His last name is French and I cannot pronounce it, but he posted a GIF to Twitter at one point, which was that scene where from like the Tom Cruise movie where he's in like a mech suit and he lands on the beach, and he's just like trying to survive an onslaught of things that are trying to kill him. And then unless you know what you're sort of stepping into, React Native's a really tough spot to exist in. Whereas iOS, albeit slow, it always felt like there was the supported way to deal with it, right? Okay, like Realm is better, but core data exists and it's going to exist for a while. So if you know how to use core data, then you're good to go. I I experience an enormous amount of tool fatigue in the JavaScript ecosystem, the React ecosystem, and the React Native ecosystem so quickly. Like Mark and I were talking about Biome the other day. Someone on stream mentioned, "Hey, have you tried Biome?" And I'm like, frankly, I don't care if it's better anymore because like I've been using this stuff for so long that like I would just be so exhausted to have to try something else. And it's why I deeply admire tools like Unistyles, if you guys have had a chance to try that at all. Um, Unistyles is really cool by its design because you don't really have to do anything beyond styling in React Native as you normally do. It just empowers you to do more, right? And if you want to rip that out, you're like, this isn't for me. It's not this whole rigmarole. It doesn't become this month-long, 2-month-long project. You just yarn uninstall Unistyles. And for the most part, that's it. Go use whatever you want, you know? And I love that. I want more people to entertain stuff like that. NativeWind is not like that. I don't see it becoming like that. It truly does require you to adopt a different mode of thinking than React Native provides out of the box. And to sort of circle then back around to, I think, Justin, something you were asking is I think one of the biggest challenges of React Native in contrast, like if you came into mobile development through React Native, I kind of feel bad for you because it doesn't, React Native, that is, provide a straightforward path by which to understand how to even create that native feeling experience, right? And I think that's so much of what is lacking. And a lot of the tools that I then build, small or large, are just in an effort to bridge that gap.
This is maybe a good time to transition and talk about NativeWind UI. So two projects of very similar names, NativeWind being the tailwind CSS-like thing for React Native, and NativeWind UI being a component library that sort of like leverages NativeWind to build a native-like component experience. So what was that description accurate, and what sort of motivated you to build it?
So there's a meme I think that I made I think a year ago. I was working on one of these like boilerplate ship fast things, for React Native. And as I'm going through, I realized like, oh my goodness, there's really not a very good library like Tailwind UI to quickly get started in React Native that meets the certain like requirements that a native application would have to have, right? Because it's not enough to just simply mirror Tailwind UI. Because the web, unlike mobile, the web has no concept of native feel, right? The entire dynamic is fundamentally different. And so I couldn't find this, and so I decided to make it. But the meme that I made and posted to Twitter was the one where the guy's in bed and the girl's in bed, and he's like, I bet he's thinking of other women or something. And it's just the guy thinking like, why is there a Tailwind UI, but there's no NativeWind UI? And then that began what I thought was going to be like, genuinely, I thought it was going to be a 3-month journey. There's no way that you could spend more than 3 months on a component library. What goes into this stuff? 8 months later, not the case. Yeah. So we finally get it out. And so that was the sort of inspiration behind making NativeWind UI. Wherever we were sort of just mapping to native functionality, which I think is, if you can do it, the best way to do stuff, right? Do not try to like make JavaScript do stuff it doesn't need to do. Just map to the native functionality. And huge credit to Fernando Rojo for sort of like really shouting that message off the top of a mountain. But we quickly ran up into situations of the shortcomings of where those bridges or whatever don't exist for either iOS components or just like a lot of Android. And so we had to create our own. And then that spawned the journey of creating like RN primitives, which is, an open source library that sits under the hood of NativeWind UI and React Native reusables. And it serves more of the behavioral, right? Because native feel is two part. There's the visual aspect, and there's the behavioral aspect. One is the more haptic, how you interact with it, how it interacts with other components. And the former, the visual, is just what it looks like. Components look different on iOS and Android. So a lot of our time was spent building out the behavioral layers, and then NativeWind really was filling in the visual layers of this stuff. Package that with like a theming system that makes sense, that's intuitive. Throw in a CLI that's reminiscent of shadcn so that people can easily just drop the code in rather than import it from a library, and then just try to create the best docs that you can. And that has been the journey of NativeWind UI. I'm really proud of how it's turned out. I can think of a million things that I want to do right now to make it better. And we're implementing now like web support, which is its own beast. But yeah, it's a great example of how understand the shape of the solution that you're trying to build and understand the problem, and particularly the problem being faced by people who want to use this, and build that. And don't try to build something that serves everybody, but just this specific group of people.
I wanted to ask, so this is modeled a lot like Tailwind UI. So Tailwind is like, or Tailwind UI, I should say, is a phenomenally successful project, financially phenomenally successful. And as you sort of alluded to, building UI libraries, actually, it's a ton of work. There is really a ton of work getting the details right, and especially if you're trying to do something like mimic a platform that already exists. And so you have like a monetization layer to this, and I'm curious as like how that experience has developed, how it started. Was it really just like, hey, Tailwind UI is like making a successful model off this, we should sort of like mirror their model and see if we can also like drive that same success? Was it like, what was the motivation, and yeah, how's it going?
Yeah, the pricing model is actually the part that I probably think about the most now, because I think there's a lot of, to sort of on a more abstract, to preface my answer, on a more abstract level, as an engineer, you go in thinking the whole thing is just build it, and you're just fulfilling a task list. And then once you put it out there, it'll just be, oh, this is what I was looking for. But in fact, there is an entirely different layer to it, which is the human engineering aspect, right? How do people expect to interface with something? And they're not always going to tell you what that is. So you have to sort of have these sort of objective conversations, introduce objective lines of questioning about how they currently do stuff in order to get at the answer in a roundabout way. And so for a while, as far as then to actually hone in on the pricing question, we mirrored the pricing options predominantly for Tailwind UI. And we even visually wanted to make it feel similar to those who are coming from the web. But we can't ignore these sort of differences between mobile and web. One of them being, as an example, for web, there's already a million of these component kits, right? Including shadcn UI. And while it isn't a component kit traditionally, the maturity of that market is much further along. And so what people can get access to, it's almost like a race to the bottom. You know what I mean? And so shadcn UI's only out really then is to be acquired by Vercel, so to speak, and begin to make things like V0, right? Mobile just isn't there yet. Like, there's not as many. And so you always have to sort of be reminded, like, okay, if someone's going to have a problem with paying, what is it, like $300 in the US for a library like this, what that probably means is that they haven't really tried to do it themselves yet. And you have to have the patience to let that person go on their journey and not try to accelerate that journey for them. Because for most of the people, and especially the people who purchase the product, when they join the community and we're chatting with them, they're over the moon. You know, if anything, they think the product's like cheap relative to what it is, especially on the team pricing plan. And so you're stuck between people, right, who are comparing you to things on the web, and people who, pricing wise, that is, and people who have clearly been struggling with this for quite some time, especially the native feel aspect, and see this as like a very cheap way to achieve that. Not compromising on the quality, of course, but relative to how much time they otherwise would have spent on it. So the question then becomes like, how can you give people more of a hint of what this experience is like? How can you give them a taste of the experience while not giving away too much? And that's hard. Pricing for developer tooling is inherently difficult because your band of audience is very narrow. Maintaining then your library is further like challenging. I don't know. When I try to think about parallels for this kind of thing, I can't help but just go back to the video game industry and kind of how games used to be, where they had to get things out. You know, there's no over-the-air update on a PlayStation disc on Spyro the Dragon, right? Whatever they were able to get into Spyro 1 is what they're going to get in, and that's going to be the experience, and that's what people are going to remember years down the line. Or like Halo and Halo 2, you know, those were not perfect, but iconic, memorable experiences. And I want to try to hang on to that as much as I can. Like I admire that one-time purchase. I've introduced recurring subscriptions. I still don't know how I feel about that. You know, I'm kind of curious how you guys think about this. You know, like I'm very curious to hear what your perception is of all these different things, but it's something that I think about a lot.
It is a conversation we tend to have very frequently on the podcast. It's like, you're doing a thing, most of your work is maybe open source. How do you make it sustainable? Like, what do you do? So Adam Watham and team have, you know, made Tailwind a phenomenal success by, you know, offering layers of stuff. It's, you know, very similar models, like basically give away Tailwind for free and then build a lot of like high quality resources on top of that. And, you know, you'll get two sides of this. You'll get people coming from, you know, they're used to pulling down an open source library and they get really frustrated that they can't use your thing that they probably wouldn't really stick to anyway, because they're not really serious about building a product. And then you get the people who like, yeah, if I tried to build this myself, it's going to be like tens of thousands of dollars and I'm really not interested in doing that. So, I mean, like you're saying, you know, 3 months, even if it was only 3 months, is like 3 months of an engineer's time is a pretty expensive endeavor. So it's like, I'm all for more of these things existing. And I also think that, you know, one of the big things is, especially when you're engaging with an audience, one of the big challenges with open source is you get people who just like drive by and they give you a little feedback, or like they just like gripe at your thing. And getting high quality engaged feedback is really hard. And you can kind of see the same thing in consulting if you charge really low prices. Like you do consulting with customers who are cheap, your feedback is going to be pretty poor. They're like going to request everything. And the kind of feedback we've heard again and again is like, charge what you're worth, you know, make it like effective to support your business. And the interesting knock-on effect is you end up getting like better quality. So, I mean, all that to say is like, I think that this is like completely a valid thing and more people should do it, because it's like, you know, as someone who's like potentially thinking about using a library like this to build a product, if I'm coming to it and it's like got a paid feature, that I'm more sure that it's going to be around, you know, next year and still be getting updates versus like, you know, an open source library that's maintained by one, you know, person who's like really, really burned out.
Yeah, I have a couple of points that I really firmly believe, and I have that sort of strong opinions loosely held kind of thing. But one thing I think regarding open source you mentioned, I do not believe open source has a financial, like I've heard a lot of discussions about this, is like open source is never going to make money for you. It's, if it hasn't worked for everyone else, you're not special. Like it's just not. So don't try to make money off of open source. That being said, there is a sort of mixed model that you can do where you can leverage open source to serve as a sort of distribution channel, right? And demonstrate value, right? And what's funny too is that you'll see folks as high up as like the guy who made Homebrew complaining about this same exact thing. It was like, I didn't even get a cheeseburger or something, right, for the work that I did. And I'm like, you did it open source. You chose to do that, you know? Equally, on the other side of that, people who use open source libraries have a tremendous level of entitlement. And I definitely see this with NativeWind, is they'll post, the issues, and they'll just be like, how could this not work? Like, this isn't working. This isn't super simple. And I just say it like it is. Like, look, post a repro or I don't care, you know? And I was baffled too, because Mark, again, is very gentle giant kind of thing. Like, he's one of the nicest people I have ever met in person. I mean, he has that kind of Aussie, like, rough around the edges kind of thing, but he's such a kind person. But when I see him in the GitHub comments, the man is like on fire. Like, he is a savage on there. He is very harsh. And I was like, is this what, like, it was like a Smeagol Gollum type of energy kind of thing. I was like, is this what open source does to people? And I feel that it's the ability to maintain a sense of humanity after maintaining a library as large as NativeWind or more is very admirable. If you meet anyone who's like still kind and like humane, like while doing that, give that person a hug. Like, thank that person, because that's amazing. So that's certainly one thing. As far as then actual products, if people aren't buying your thing and you have a large enough distribution channel, move on. They don't want it. They don't want the thing. And you need to be okay with that. That's really hard for me still. I have deep passion projects that I really admire that I think are very promising. And I have a distribution channel to plug them through, and then people just don't respond. And I'm like, that's just it, and you need to have that humility. You need to sort of check that ego at the door. That's something you can't even explain to a person. I'm sure you guys run into people all the time who are like, oh, we just have to do this like another month or two of work or something, right? And then we'll launch, and then no, it won't. Because if it hasn't popped off in the last 6 to 12 months, it's absolutely not going to pop off in the next month or two. But marketing is hard. And that's really what I'm faced with right now, is like, as an engineer, marketing is not as, what do you call it, trackable or quantifiable as engineering time is. And I can definitely see how someone coming from that background might get very frustrated with that dynamic.
Yeah, and as engineers, we love fast feedback loops. Marketing is the opposite. It's like you throw some stuff against the wall, some stuff might stick. It probably wasn't because of you, and you have to somehow use that information and go forward and like market a product. I've failed at it many a time.
Like today we had that video launch with Simon, right? And Simon Grimm is who I'm talking about. He does great videos on YouTube. He made this video, and I woke up today and we got a handful of orders for NativeWind UI, and I'm still just so thankful for every single order that comes through. Like that Stripe notification coming through, it has not gone away. The novelty and how much I appreciate and get excited about each thing like that. So I'm not taking any of it for granted just yet. Hopefully, I'm hopeful to be anywhere near the success level of Tailwind UI. That would be incredible. But I think we got a long way to go before then. And there's maybe some aspect of the formula that we could improve upon. But, I'm learning just like everybody else is. I'm curious to see what happens between Expo Router and NativeWind, what they offer there. And ultimately, I want the experience of building React Native applications to be not easy, but straightforward. I'm fine with painful if it means that, this framework is allowing me to do the wrong thing, but it's making it painful to do it, and it'll make it like easy to do the right thing.
So maybe on that note, as we wrap up, we always like to ask a future facing question. And I think that your lead in here is like perfect. So as you think about the next few years, building apps on React Native, building mobile apps in general, what does that look like in your mind? What are you excited about for the future? Where do you think the big changes are going to be?
I think that React Native overall is in this very interesting spot where they finally started to say what React Native isn't going to do, which in a lot of ways I think is way more significant than trying to do all the things, which is where I think React Native has been for a while. Like it spent a lot of time trying to catch up or fulfill a certain spec list. And they're finally starting to say what they're not going to do. And what that invites folks to do is to create things on top of that foundation in the same way that React did this and spawn things like Next.js. And then it's more on companies like Next.js, and in our case, like Expo, to create things like server-side rendering, like the whole React server components, all that jazz. I love that there are people like Nate who are creating new frameworks and doing that hard work of creating different approaches on top of this foundation. So I think we're going to see a lot more of that. And I think a lot of them are going to fail, but they need to exist. And on the other side of it is going to still be these like third-party applications that exist even further beyond, which I think is a massive strength of the React Native ecosystem is all like the third-party community support. What I hope is that we don't lose sight, because again, the majority of the mobile developers have already come through, right? The next wave, if React Native's community or the users of React Native is to double, is going to come from web. And what I hope we don't lose sight of in that process is the importance of that native feel, because native is no longer meaning mobile. It means native to a platform, whether that is Mac OS, a watch, a TV, Android, it means so much. And I would like these, what are currently challenging things, to become a lot easier, or at least more straightforward, so that people can focus on building meaningful, great applications without having to spend 80% of their time focused on how it would look native to its platform. And so what that's going to look like, very hard to say. I think from the Expo side of things, we're going to see Expo become a hosting service. They're going to start to host. The ability to utilize React server components is it necessitates a hosting platform alongside it. And so you're going to start to see native development overall shift to a different kind of dynamic. And there's not going to be nearly as many questions as there are now. I think it'll get more opinionated, and there'll just be a lot of different opinionated approaches to doing this. So where NativeWind UI or any of the other stuff I plan to build fits into that, I have absolutely no idea. Anybody's guess. Yours is as good as mine.
Well, every time I talk to a React Native developer, I'm always so excited to go try to build something. I am one of those web developers that looks over and goes, oh yeah, I probably should have created a mobile app for that. So I'm very excited to try out what you got. I might try it the next time I try to build an app.
Please let me know. Happy to hook you up with a license, both of you, if you'd like.
Sweet.
It's always looking for the feedback.
Sweet. Well, that wraps it up for our questions, Dan. Thanks for coming on. This is a really fun, interesting conversation diving into the depths of React Native. So thanks again for coming on.
Thanks, Dan.
Yeah, thanks for having me.